Hello and welcome everybody to energy efficiency. First up, thank you for everybody's engagement thus far getting on the Learn page. So if you're watching this video, or listening to this video, you've made it onto the Learn page, and also so far there's been a great deal of submissions for task one, and a great many of those successful on their first attempt. So fantastic, good work. In regards to this short video, so I've recorded this video to help supplement some of the resources that are there. So we don't have a virtual class allocated for this subject, but I'll be going through, having a look at where help can be best be placed in the subject, and try to head off some of the issues and updating of resources. So things change from time to time, including the National Construction Code. However, my intention is to stick with the recordings as they are, with Michael White and David Clothier, two lecturers who bring a great deal of experience and knowledge to this situation. And then on top, I'll be adding my bits and pieces there to complete picture or update resources as required. Also, many of you be aware at this point, I'm sharing this subject with Merryn Costas, so she's taking some of you in terms of the marking, and she may also have some input in moving forward. And whilst Merryn is taking some of the students like yourselves for the marking, I'll be taking a group as well. So typically you'll be aware of whose group you're in shortly, and if not already, and please communicate that any questions also that you have with either one of us. So without further ado, I'll get into this section 2, or or session 2, supplementary resource. And this is the 2019 NCC. So in the recordings made by David Clothier and Michael White, they're referring to the NCC of 2016, which in the main, there haven't been major changes, although there are major changes in regards to what is called Section J for NCC Volume 1. But in terms of NCC Volume 2, which we're dealing with in this subject, there haven't been too many substantive changes, but it does look a little bit different. So I've taken it upon myself to take you through the new 2019 NCC. So this NCC obviously came out in mid 2019. We're now mid 2020, but as with many NCC section updates, there is a grace period for compliance with those updates. And in the case of the energy efficiency updates for the 2019, that was a 1-year grace period. So people could continue to operate business as usual under the 2016 for that 12 months. However, that period is now just finished. So I'll be showing you the new 2019, despite the fact that there are no real substantive differences when it comes to your interpretation and your tasks, and certainly the application in regards to Class 1 and 10 buildings. So 2019, I've put this updated PDF on the Learn page for you to refer directly to the section that's applicable. But by all means, and in fact it's even expected of you at this point, you've created an ABCB login, so the Australian Building Codes Board. Create your own login, and I encourage you to download a copy of the 2019, at least Volume 1 and Volume 2 NCC. So our Volume 3, not particularly applicable to building designers. Some aspects in there from time to time are, but in the main, our Volume 1 and our Volume 2 are the really important ones for you to download, because you need to have regular access to them. So being a residential building, I'm referring to the Volume 2 section, and this one's here for you, supplied as a resource. So we'll be looking at for this second stage, the building fabric. So when it comes to energy efficiency, we've got things such as our building fabric, which play a role in how energy efficient building is, our external glazing, our building ceiling, air movement, and services. So later on in the subject, we'll be looking at some more of these other aspects, but currently we're having a look at building fabric. So we'll go to part 3.12.1, but on the way, I've marked other little bits and pieces that we should consider. So scrolling down through here, you'll see the section of markup. It's where we've got a bit of explanatory information saying if you want to comply with the NCC, you've got two options. Well, this is the deemed to satisfy approach. Now there's always the possibility to meet performance requirements. However, the justification of those performance requirements is a difficult, lengthy, and often expensive process, and something that goes beyond the bounds of what we can, adequately cover. And each situation is unique as well. So we don't focus on that in this subject, but we do look at deemed to satisfy, and in meeting the deemed to satisfy, we've got two options. Our option one is to get an energy rating. So if we have sufficient knowledge and insight into how we can make a reasonably energy efficient building, we can typically apply that knowledge straight away in our design and be fairly confident that our energy rating will meet 6 stars, and then we go out and get an energy rating that meets the 6 stars, and we progress on. So that's one option, is we can have an energy rating. They're fairly inexpensive and also provide a great deal of insight into other aspects that you might want to tweak a little bit as well. So certainly a good idea, but to help with some of the base understanding, some of that formulation of how we design a sufficient building, it's really good for us to go through the approach of the elemental provisions. So that's what we'll be doing primarily in this session, is having a look at the elemental provisions, because that tells us the levels of insulation or typically in this stage, the level of insulation we'll need in certain scenarios for certain types of building fabric. So our elemental provisions on page 366. So we'll make our way down to page 366. On the way, here's a diagrammatic version of basically what I've just expressed up here. But you can have a look at that diagrammatic version if that helps with that understanding. So on the way, something that's not particularly applicable to, or it's not applicable to the task or specific to what we're covering in this subject, but something you should always be aware of within the NCC is that there are state and territory variations. And whenever you see a state and territory variation, it's good to stop and read and have a look. It may apply to you. Now, this particular state and territory variation for South Australia, so the area in which we're working, is about providing some concessions for lightweight buildings in certain areas within South Australia. So you'll see that under here, there are local government areas listed. So primarily our northern and remote council areas. So we've got Ceduna, Cleve, Coorong, etc. from this range. So typically our council areas that are further out and not council areas that many of you will be working in, but some of you may, or from time to time, dabble in these areas. If you are and you're building a lightweight building, it may apply to you. You may be able to adopt this approach at a concession, which enables the energy rating to be reduced to 5 stars instead of our 6 stars as we saw before. But beyond that, look, have a read, have a little bit of an understand of this, but most importantly, just be aware that it's there. So we'll keep passing on to what is directly applicable to what we're covering in this section here. So we're looking at building fabric, and we're looking at class 1 buildings, so our separate residential buildings, be that detached or semi-detached buildings. Then here we are at page 366. is where it all really starts with our building fabric, and it starts with roofs. So this section is broken down into our components being our roofs, walls, and floors, and then we move on to glazing to that. But our roofs, they have to meet a certain R value, so a resistance value for your insulation. And all of that, the ins and outs of that, are explained in the lecture carried out by Michael White, that I think is there on the Learn page. And I suggest that it's good to cover that lecture first. So watch that lecture and that tutorial session to digest all that information before you have a look at this updated video I'm producing here. But because this video is meant to be supplementary to that resource and take you through the new 2019 version. So here we are at our roofs, and just like as is shown in that lecture there, we have minimum R values that are required for various different situations, be that our different climate zones. So we've got different climate zones, or different roof solar absorbance. So that solar absorbance, as you should know, is based on the color of the roof, and different colors have a different degree of absorbance of that solar radiation, so have a different heating and or cooling effect on the building. So we have our different total R values required for different categories of solar absorbance under our different climate zones. And you see that climate zone 2 is broken into altitudes of less than 300 meters and altitudes of more than 300 meters, because as you increase your altitude, the average temperature drops away. That's why we have snow-capped mountains, etc. So as you increase your way up the mountains, things get colder and colder. So we have different criteria for altitudes less than 300 and altitudes more than 300. But although substantively, our minimum total R values are very similar, but the major difference is that less than 300 is all about heat flow down, and then above 300 it's about down and up. And that's into the next important thing I think that may help with task 2, is that with some situations we are concerned with heat flow down, and so insulate against heat flow down. But then in other situations we are concerned with heat flow up. So in our colder climates, the climates 6 and 7, the ones with the higher numbers, we're worried about that heat escaping the building. So we want to keep those buildings warm. And so that's where the focus of the NCC and the minimum R values required are on that heat flow up. But in our hotter climates, where in climate zone 1, so where the numbers are low, we're worried about that heat flow downwards, so the heating of the building from that roof space from the sun up above. But then in certain situations, we're worried about flow for down and up. So please be aware of that if you're not already, and that we have our different R value requirements based on our different solar absorbance. And that can be, if you're going to apply this professionally, those solar absorbance guidelines are in this table here, showing you different colors and the related solar absorbance from those different colors. Then, so that's our total R values that are required. However, that R value can be made up of a contribution by the building fabric and a contribution by the added insulation. So if we have an R value required of 4.1, it's not that we have to have 4.1 insulation. It may be that the roof style we have chosen contributes part of that R value. So that's what this section here, 3.12.1.1, shows, that you have various different roof types and construction approaches that have different contributory R values inherent in their construction. So having a look at this Skillion roof here, we've got a contribution of R.48 in a downwards direction of heat flow. So if we're looking at climate zone 1, for example, or climate zone 2, our 0.48 contribution is important to us in working out what additional insulation we require. And then if we're looking at climate 6, 7, etc., then our heat flow upwards is what's important. And then if we're in one of those middle categories that requires heat flow up and down, well, then we've got to consider both. So we can gain an appreciation from the NCC of what those contributory R values are for our roof construction types, and then determine how much extra insulation we need on top. So, for example, if we had an R value required of 4.1 downwards, then because this Skillion type of roof contributes 0.48 in a downwards direction, that means we would have to have an additional amount of insulation of R3.62. So that R3.62 is R4.1 minus 0.48. That's if I've got my maths right off the top of my head there. So we're looking at that additional insulation, and that's basically the sort of answers we're expecting in the task. In practice, you're typically purchasing insulation or specifying insulation in increments of R.5, so you'll probably get R4.5 bats. So if we need R3.6, you're probably going to specify an R4 bat. So NCC sets those minimum standards, so the worst building that can be legally built, for example. You've probably heard that one multiple times so far. So they are the minimum requirements that we have to meet. But in your specification, typically you'll assess what the minimum requirement is, and then specify to that or above. So that and we'll just go through the rest of the 2019 NCC for some other bits that may be applicable. So we've got adjustment of minimum R value for loss of ceiling insulation. This was covered in the tutorial session with Mark and David. So important when it comes to looking at the inclusion of downlights, etc., and other inclusions that will reduce the amount of insulation in a roof. So very important stuff to know in practice, but not directly applicable to our task. And then also information here in 2019 in regards to roof lights. So that's also what was covered significantly in that lecture. So this is the updated information there. It's all very much similar to the 2016 version, except it looks a little bit different with some of these explanatory sections in there. And then also when it comes to roof lights, table 3.12.3, if I were correct off the top of my head, has been removed, and it's actually in it's in text form as opposed to the table form. But really very little substantive difference there, but just a bit of a different appearance to what you will have seen in the lecture and the slides. So hopefully that gives you with a good insight into some of the changes with the NCC and what sort of things you'll specifically have to look for in the task. But certainly, if you have any further questions or so about any of these things, please send me an email. So michael.jenkins@tafesa.au, and I hope to be engaging with you further throughout this subject and hearing if there are any concerns or things you wish to share. Thank you very much.